Hello, my friends. What do you think is the best true crime book? A lot of people would say In Cold Blood, which I've reviewed for this channel, is the best true crime book. I don't think I liked that book as much as I liked this one. And the book that I'm going to be reviewing is called The Devil in the White City. Is it called that? The Devil in the White City? Let's see. The Devil in the White City, yes. It's called that. By Eric Larson. And it details two things. Maybe even three. Two things. One is the attempt by Chicago to put on the 1893 World's Fair, and a serial killer who went by the name of H. Holmes. And he built a monstrosity of a house called the Castle. And there had too many rooms, and the lower level was dedicated to businesses, and it had like really weird things inside of it. Like there was like a furnace, and there were rooms where gas was piped in, and Holmes's room had the control for that function, and there was like a vault down below. And it also, as I said, focuses on an architect named Burnham and his struggles to make the 1893 Chicago Fair successful. And the reason that Chicago wanted this fair is because they wanted to celebrate the anniversary of Columbus reaching the New World in 1492. And so it was called the Columbian Exposition. And they wanted to sort of one up Paris, because Paris had earlier had an exhibition that, like a World's Fair, that had attracted a lot of people. And the Eiffel Tower was actually built as a part of that fair. So Chicago was like, yeah, we need to do that. We need to show people that we are one of the best cities in the world. And so the book sort of details that process. It details all of the people who were involved in that. And it talks about how people in Chicago felt. It talks about the history of architecture in America, like the influences the fair had on architecture in America. And it also talks about the concept of landscape design, like a landscape architect, which is like a normal thing now. And it kind of started with a guy named Olson. And he didn't just do the fair, he also did Central Park in New York. And he kind of butted heads a lot with Burnham. And then it also deals with the consequences of this, because the fair happened at a time when actually America was going through an economic decline. And in Chicago, that process was sort of halted for a while, because so many people went to the fair and so many people were working at the fair that when the fair stopped after about 6-7 months, a lot of people became unemployed. So in the fair also, they had these things called the Columbian Police Force. So basically they were special police dedicated to maintaining order in the fair, in the park, because it was like by this park. And actually it was so safe there that people would go for walks at night to the fair, because they couldn't in Chicago. So you had this high level of safety in the park, and then the park closes, and then you go back to normalcy. And it talks about the legacies of Burnham and Frank Lloyd Wright, who was basically hired by one of Burnham's competitors named Sullivan, and how that Frank Lloyd Wright is a famous architect, if you don't know, and he had like this very sort of the desire to create an American school of architecture. So that's really, really, really interesting. And I would say that's about 75% of the story is all about the World's Fair. And the 25% is about the first serial killer in America, H.H. Holmes. And I read another book about him, and I forgot what the title was, but generally there is an argument that Holmes was not a serial killer because he's only documented to have killed 9 people, or 8 or 9 people, and those people that he murdered were generally connected to his insurance plots. So it's not like, I think the classic definition of a serial killer is somebody who doesn't really have a motive, but his motive was financial. He wanted to benefit from that. And he was a guy, like a super, super charming guy, which is unusual for serial killers, I think. He was super, super charming, and women loved him. Kind of like Ted Bundy, I would guess, but not exactly. A little bit maybe more successful. I don't know who would be more successful. That's a stupid conversation. But anyway, Holmes was very, very attractive, very charismatic. But he would do this thing where he would set himself up as a doctor, because I think he did study a little bit of medicine. So he got a pharmacy, but I think he murdered the old lady who was running the pharmacy. And he would get all of these things, like, as I mentioned, he built this huge mansion called the Castle. But for 2 reasons, he didn't want to pay like the workers. He didn't want any worker knowing all of the secrets of the castle, so he would just say that the worker did a bad job and then fire them and not pay them and then hire somebody else and repeat that process. So he did that with a lot of things. He even had a weird bicycle scam where he would go to bicycle shops and he would buy bikes on credit, and then he'd sell the bikes and get the money and not pay back the loan that he got for, buying the bicycle, which is really, really odd. And so generally, he kind of wore out his welcome in Chicago around the same time the fair ended. So he had kind of maneuvered himself into owning some property, I think in Texas or Kentucky. And he was on his way there when he decided to murder a henchman of his, because, yeah, he had a henchman. And so in the process of murdering his henchman, he also murdered 3 children and his children, and was about to murder the henchman's wife. And it's so weird because, and I don't remember what book I read this in, but in that book and in this book, there's like a really touching explanation of what happened. So the mother of these kids, and these kids were like really neglected and they were starving to death. And one boy, we don't know how he was killed, but the 2 girls were stuffed in a trunk. And Holmes went to visit the mother as the kids were in the trunk, because the mother was staying like 2 blocks, maybe not 2 blocks, but like a walk within walking distance of the hotel. I think this happened in Toronto. And that's crazy that you could just kidnap 2 kids 100 years ago, 120 years ago, and go to 130 years ago, and go to another country and murder them, and no one said anything. That's so wild. But anyway, so the mother was in a hotel about 2 blocks, 3 blocks away from where her kids were being suffocated. And Holmes cut a hole in the trunk, and then put some pipe, and then put some gas, and murdered the girls. So he buried them. He cut off one of the girl's feet because she had club feet, and he didn't want them to be recognized. So he went to Kentucky and he was arrested by the Pinkertons because of his insurance schemes. And if he had never done any insurance schemes, he probably wouldn't have been caught. But then there it goes back to what I said before. Like, there's a theory that he was murdering because of his insurance schemes and not because he was a serial killer. Yeah, so he gets caught, and then they start to do some investigations, and they realize that Holmes killed his henchman, and his henchman had 3 children who are unaccounted for. So this set off like a search for them, and there were like detectives who went all over the country looking for them. Eventually they went to Toronto, and they discovered what they discovered, which are these 2 bodies, and then they discovered the boy whose bones were in Holmes's mansion in Chicago. So probably what happened is that I don't remember exactly the details, but I think the boy was taken to Chicago, to Toronto, then to Chicago, and then murdered in Chicago, and the girls were murdered in Toronto. So yeah, it's a horrible, horrible story. And one thing that the book does well is it talks about the fascination that the public had at the time with Jack the Ripper, because those crimes were becoming common knowledge. And it kind of compares and contrasts Jack the Ripper with Holmes, because Jack the Ripper seemed to have been a more kind of ferocious beast of nature, and Holmes was evil in a different way, like a more calculating way. So it does a good job with that. They talk about there was, I forgot, there was some society that was made up of journalists who had all of these like macabre items, and they were kind of devoted to Jack the Ripper. And I think maybe this was a thread that he was going to pick up, like Eric Larson was going to pick up at the end of the book and talk about the sort of cultural impact of Holmes. But he doesn't really. It kind of just dies. And so the last little bit is just kind of the affair is over. Like, the book is in 4 parts, and the last bit is kind of bringing Holmes to justice and what happened to the various characters in the World's Fair part of the story. Yeah, so I think that it's a really good book because it shows the world that Jack the Ripper lived in. And in many ways, it's very alien to our world. Like, they talk about alienists because they didn't really have psychologists back then. And they talk about, painting the buildings with lead paint and all of these things that are like, okay. But, you can see the foundations of our world being built, though, because there's a Ferris wheel for the first time. That was the marvel of engineering that the World's Fair came up with, or Ferris came up with it, actually. And you have, like, architecture being able to build skyscrapers for the first time. But also socially, you had women, and this is an argument of the book, that women were independent for the first time. They were making money for the first time, so they went to the big city, but they weren't, like, they expected all the mores of kind of provincial life to function in a city. And somebody like Holmes could exploit that because he's good looking, he's attractive, and everybody wants to be married to him. Like, he got married 3 times, right? And he never divorced his first wife. So surprisingly, he wasn't charged with bigamy as well. He was only charged ever with 1 crime. And during the trial, the prosecution wanted to call to the stand witnesses connected to his other crimes. And the judge, from a legal point of view, the judge made the right decision. The judge said, no, we can only talk about the crimes that he's actually charged with. And it's wild that he wasn't charged with anything else. But remember, he was caught because of insurance fraud. He wasn't caught because of anything else. So the prosecution wanted to interview all of these witnesses to his other crimes, but they weren't interviewed, so we don't know. We don't know a lot about Holmes. And I think that's why this book is so interesting, because it has the social development of the White City and the World's Fair, but it also has interesting insights into why somebody would kill other people. Because there's always a question like, why do people like true crime? And I think people's answers will vary, but I like true crime because I think about it like a puzzle. Like, why would somebody do that? And then you start to see like the pieces, like, okay, he's doing it because he wants the insurance, or he's doing it because he likes the thrill or whatever. So yeah, if you've never read this book, I would really recommend it. I'd give it like a 9.5 out of 10. It is really, really good. One criticism was that one of the reviewers at the time, I think the book came out in 2003, was that it's sort of like a grab bag of different things. But I don't think it is a grab bag of different things. It's showing you what society was like at this one particular time, and why that society that was like that at that particular time led to this particular type of serial killer. It'd be interesting to kind of take that approach. I'm not sure he wrote any other books. If he did, I will check them out for sure. But it would be interesting to take that approach to like serial killers in the 70s. Like, what was it about society that made serial killers so prevalent then? Or medical serial killers, like, I forgot what his name is, but maybe one of the most prolific serial killers of all time is a British doctor or nurse. So why is that so prevalent? So I think that would be interesting. And like, talk about society and talk about this one guy. So it's an interesting approach. All right, what did you think? If you've read the book, leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. Generally, I like to say that I'm trying to be the most prolific reviewer of all time, but I just said that thing about the most prolific serial killers, so maybe I won't say that in this episode, but you can check out my other videos where I do say that. So please subscribe, please like, please comment. Thank you. Bye-bye.